since 2018, we've had Brexit, we've had COVID, we've had Ukraine war, we've had energy spikes, we've had Tehran stuff now as we speak. We have come out of each and every one of those challenges of an industry stronger than ever. Yeah, we're probably in an era now in terms of the last couple of years of probably plateauing in terms of that milk supply, that explosion from just under 5 billion litres to now just under 9 billion litres, which is a phenomenal success story for not just rural Ireland, for the Irish economy, full stop. But we are now probably going into an age where what does success look like? How do we go up the value chain? How do we keep farmers on the land? How do we add value, etc.?
This week's episode is a special one as it marks the 500th episode of the Dairy Edge podcast. We're taking a look beyond the farm gate to the wider dairy industry. I'm joined today by Conor Mulvihill, Director of Dairy Industry Ireland. We'll discuss the remit of Dairy Industry Ireland within the wider industry, the current market outlook, what value added really means for Irish dairy, the importance of the grass-fed story, and some of the key challenges and opportunities facing the industry.
So we have three wings. We have primary dairy, which a lot of your listeners are supplying into. So you have your member co-ops, Tirlan being the biggest by volume, but also Ornua in that. You also have a specialised nutrition wing. So we're very lucky in Ireland that we're world leaders in specialised nutrition. We produce here on this island over 10% of the globe's infant formula, for example, but we also produce a lot of other dairy-based specialised nutrition. And about 5 years ago, we added our third wing, which is food for special medical purposes, which is if you have a relative in the hospital now, James, or any of your listeners, they're often on products like nutrition products, protein products, fat products, cancer patients, people in nursing homes. So that's where we're trying to encourage the regulation and technology of our dairy farmers up through that supply chain. So that's a big element of my work at the moment.
First episode was of the podcast was aired in 2018, January 2018. That's 8 years ago now, Conor. From your perspective, how has the Irish dairy industry maybe changed over that period? We're working on 8 years, you're working on 10 years. So we'll take it that period, 8 to 10 years. How has it changed, I suppose? And where do you think the sector stands today, maybe compared to that point in time?
It's a huge change, James, in terms of the last 15 years, maybe extended a little bit more, have been the most transformative years for Irish dairy in the history of the 1,000 years of our industry that we've had in this island. In 2018, remember, we were in the throes of our dairy expansion, all planned, by the way, in terms of the post-quota era that kind of kicked in from 2014, 2015 on. And then, of course, we're 1 year into the debacle that was Brexit in terms of the division of our island dairy economy, because remember, we have an all-island dairy economy here in Ireland, and our key market in an absolute flux, which to this day, people say, geez, how'd you get over Brexit, Conor, there in 2016, 2017, 2018? And I was like, is it finished? News to me, we're still dealing to this day with the outrunnings of Brexit. But what I will say is we have got through since 2018. We've had Brexit, we've had COVID, we've had Ukraine war, we've had energy spikes, we've had Tehran stuff now as we speak. We have come out of each and every one of those challenges of an industry stronger than ever. Yeah, we're probably in an era now in terms of the last couple of years of probably plateauing in terms of that milk supply, that explosion from just under 5 billion litres to now just under 9 billion litres, which is a phenomenal success story for not just rural Ireland, for the Irish economy, full stop. But we are now probably going into an age where and we'll talk about probably later, James, about what does success look like? How do we go up the value chain? How do we keep farmers on the land? How do we add value, etc.? So look, that's where we are at the moment.
And that's the questions. It was very clear, I suppose, back then, Conor, in terms of the whole post-quota thing, where we were going. I suppose it's maybe not as clear in terms of there's not as big a policy change maybe as we go forward, but in terms of how do we continue to improve the industry, grow the industry, and add value, which we'll come to. I want to pick your brain maybe on the current situation in global dairy markets, and what are the key trends that are maybe shaping returns for our Irish milk producers at the moment.
Yeah. So after a difficult 2023 and 2024 for Irish dairy, let's call a spade. We had a golden era from 2015, 2014, 2015 on to 2023. Then there was the era of what I call policy incoherence. There was the threat of nitrates, there was the threat of all those issues, there was climate change, legislation, people, and like we saw a huge decrease in Irish dairy unexpectedly, 9% over 2023 and 2024, reduction of milk supply, which wasn't in the script. This was after 15 years of constant growth, to the point whenever I went out to Europe on behalf of DII and to the European Dairy Association, people were coming, what the hell is happening in Ireland? And I said, look, this is planned. We've been planning for this since 1983, guys. Like this is, we've been held back. So there was a bit of negativity, I'm sure, and like I've heard your podcast. This has been debated over the course of
Mm,
those couple of years, and looked at many policy incoherence from my ivory tower, but weather, price, sentiment. Then in 2025, I sometimes use the phrase "the empire struck back." Last year, the empire. Those of you who see Star Wars, the big bad dairy industry roared back into action over 2025. And we had a brilliant year, driven by exceptional market prices, driven by a Carlsberg weather year. You
mm,
couldn't get better weather at the time. Just when drought was coming, rain came. You got good sentiment within the co-ops and processors. You had the change of policy in America and globally, where people wanted to move away from what were called ultra processed foods and move back towards real food, which dairy was a big topic. Yes, it has to be acknowledged things got very difficult in the autumn of the year on. But remember, we were well past peak. We had 85% of the milk kind of processed at that stage. So yes, when I speak to you here now in mid-March 2026, markets are still not great. But at the same time, there's green shoots emerging in your GDTs and your pieces, and like a silver lining to the tragedy that's happening there in the Middle East at the moment, James, is as oil prices rise, dairy prices rise, as long as in the 25 years I'm following it. So look, I certainly not trying to make hay out of what is a global tragedy, and people will be under pressure and costs will come in, and I'm sure we might touch on that as well,
mm.
not just for farmers but for processors will come in, but it will accelerate, we're hoping, recovery in dairy markets.
And would you say that kind of short to medium term, there was a lot of maybe talk that it was going to be maybe into that third quarter before we'd maybe see recovery in markets, and you look at the auctions, they're probably picking up pace maybe quicker than people might have projected.
Ever the optimists, James, we're having, but look, it has to be said, that co-ops and processors way overpaid for milk last year in terms of where the market went, because they paid in advance, and obviously product takes a while to go through it. So let's say farmer boards will be working their way through that. They know their own businesses inside out better than me. So look, there will be a bit of a lag, but look, the recovery is well underway, is what I'd say, James.
You're not going to give us any market projections in terms of cents per litre, Connor, or where you
No,
think it might go over the
yeah,
coming months.
what I would say is demand is holding, but there was an increase in milk supply in all key markets. Remember, we're 93% exporters. We don't have an internal market in Ireland that will support a milk price. We are dependent on global markets. When you're exporting the bones of 19 out of every 20 litres of milk that are produced this morning in Cavan and in Kerry and Limerick, you have to take the global price for all your commodities. It's about diversifying that. So look, we have no expertise in dairy industry Ireland in terms of a milk price per se. What we try to do is create a commercial environment for the Irish dairy industry to thrive and work with partners like Board B and the government to get around and get through any issues. But look, I think we can look forward to 2026 with better confidence than we had at Christmas, put it that way, James.
We hear the term and it actually come up there maybe as we look forward as an industry. Farmers hear the term a lot, value added, and that maybe is the space in terms of that we're looking in, when discussing the future of Irish dairy. What does value added actually look like in practice for the industry? And how important is it maybe for improving the value of Irish milk, given the fact that we export a lot of product, we export a lot of powder, a lot of cheese. So, when we have this whole discussion around value added, what does it actually look like? What's happening in that space?
Yeah. The first thing, and we'll touch on maybe this later as well, the first thing to realize about Irish dairy processing is we have a double-edged sword. So we have our greatest asset is also our greatest weakness in our processing, is that the product we make is high value, grass-fed, high quality milk. But the issue is we get the vast bulk of our supply over summer month because of the model we go down. But then from our processing perspective, and I'm not complaining about this, I'm very much a believer of the grass-fed model that we have in terms of cost and reputation. But it means that we have to, as an industry, we the processors have to process that as soon as it comes in, which means your options for selling on that product become a little bit more limited than they would in, let's say, your Arlas or your Frisian Campinas, who are maybe more of a flat line and who can really structure what they're doing. Now, that's not making excuses for us in the least, but it has to be acknowledged because it's often not brought up in debates, so that we as an industry essentially have stainless steel for essentially a 1 month period of the year peak, and then we take those costs in the shoulders, and that's fine. We actually support that. Then for your value added story, I can go and talk to you about, you know, protein, sports nutrition, elder care, life care, all of that kind of stuff, consumer foods, etc. But at the end of the day, even if we're talking again on your 1000th episode, James,
Mm.
commodities are still going to be very important to us because of the nature of how we have to process that very quickly. Once you make butter, you have skim milk powder that goes up and down. You're taking the fat in one direction, you're taking protein in another direction, and then we're just always trying to look where the next value added piece is. But I do think there has to be a conversation, and there is a conversation in terms of how do we now, once we now in a stage we're not really building the factories we did over the course of the 2010s and the early 2020s, that our industry and our members are looking into that strategy of how you're going to add value add. And by Jesus, James, we have some success stories around our industry, both in the native industry, but also help international partners. I would challenge some of your listeners to next time they're watching Formula One or their Drive to Survive, who are the main sponsors of McLaren? Optimum Nutrition, which is a Glanbia brand, of which Tyrone are a huge supplier. If you want to see where the new Irish dairy is going, in terms of it. So I'm not claiming victory or anything, but it's
Mm.
what is going to form. If we can get over, obviously we might touch on the sustainability challenges of the industry into the future. But if we can get over those issues and keep the dairy industry where we have it at the moment, we can really drive on in that value added. And Ireland is in a brilliant position in terms of the globe wants this pure quality Irish dairy, which we're able to provide. They're looking for pure foods of which we can be a fundamental building block. And it's the challenge of us as industry, with the support of our farmer suppliers, is to convince the world that we're able to do that, which does, I'm afraid, include our food safety, our environmental metrics, our
Mm.
logistical metrics, and proving those proof points to the international markets. But we can do it. We're never going to develop, James, what Italy or France have in terms of all these heritage cheeses. Yes, we've some brilliant, amazing, cottage cheeses, and some who are getting through the markets. That has kind of gone beyond us now from an Irish perspective. And I hope to be proven wrong, and a new type of parmesan will be invented in Ireland but that's not where we're going. Our future is high value, value added dairy, and probably into as an ingredient into special products like infant formula, young child formula, or lifestyle foods.
You mentioned it there around the grass-based production system, and um, how important is that grass-fed story maybe in that international market piece? You've touched on it, but do you see that as a form of value added in itself?
Sometimes my mind boggles, Joe. Like, and I had to buy, like, I'm a very proud Irishman. I'm a very proud participant in the Irish dairy industry. You probably can hear that from our conversation so far. But I sometimes wince about, when it's just seen as a received wisdom that Irish dairy is the best in the world. Oh, great. Yeah, I believe that myself, but you have to prove it. Everyone thinks their dairy is the best in the world. Everyone thinks their dairy is the best in the world. So what we have to do is go beyond and find out what are our proof points. Remember, in the European Union alone, we're only 4% of milk supply. In the globe, we're just over 1% of milk supply. So why would someone in China, with due respect, they don't know we think Limerick and Cavan are amazing and things like that. But with due respect, 99.9% of the people in the world don't know that. So what you're looking for is what is your USP, your unique divider that marks you out. And for me, it'll be grass fed and always grass fed. So that is not to disparage anyone who's not in that system. And there's different people and different views, and I think there's a place for that in the Irish system. But for me, if you want to associate success of the Irish industry and what marks us out, let's say in the US, in Germany, in Australia, and China, I think grass fed is the way to go.
Mm. Another thing that's cropping up, and you mentioned it there in some of our conversation in terms of milk price volatility. And it's obviously something farmers have experienced over the years. It was all well touted, I suppose, post 2015, post quota, that maybe could become more common as well. Do you think there's a role maybe for milk price and stability mechanisms in Ireland? And I suppose what sort of options might exist to help manage that volatility?
I do, is the quick answer, and it's very controversial. Our members have tried to roll out power price contracts, and to be honest, I'm going to call a spade here, James. And like I'm from a farmer background myself. Farmers only want to win, and when they go down, they don't want to hear about it and say they well. So a milk forward contracts are there to smooth volatility. So you'll have times you win and you lose. Now there's been a lot of innovation in Ireland in terms of it. The milk flex element that some of your listeners will be participant in is a great example of that, where it's kind of power contracts for beginners, for want of a better word. Power contracts have been rolled out, and nearly every company and every co-op has tried them, but there has been issues, and a lot of people got burnt in that 2023 element, and I have a lot of sympathy for that. My view as well is that we should not throw the baby out of the bathwater. I think the experience of the last couple of months in the markets could have been mitigated a lot if there was forward price contracts. I'm not saying us as industry should be absolved of that, but certainly like we should have had learnings, maybe collar and cuff mechanisms. I think we should look for experience in terms of how we price milk, how we design it. I think we're not fit for purpose, in terms of even how we price 3.6 and 3.3, in terms of how we price elite. Like that's something from the Stone Age. We're the only country, to my knowledge, in the world that even does that. We don't even know how to account for our milk at the moment. Not to mind get onto the forward price contracts. So that's something I think can be addressed. It won't be DII, it'll be DII, hopefully, with your ICOSs, your IFAs, your ICMSAs, your department, your CSO. But I'd strongly call for an honest discussion about forward price contracts and how we price milk, because we're going into an age where the liter of milk really means nothing, and you've heard of that from
I was
Um,
just going to actually
yeah,
say that in terms of we still talk about cents per litre. Like,
absolutely. Yeah.
is it time that industry maybe moved on from that and was a little bit more innovative in terms of like really you're paid per kilo of solid now, Connor, and
Correct,
it's
correct.
something we're not familiar with, I suppose, and our
Yeah,
farmer listeners, we're used to the cents per litre
yeah.
conversation.
I'd be the last person to dictate to anyone about how they price their milk, be it gallons or liters and fat content and things like that. But in the world I live with, and I represent some of these companies. I interact with other companies. They don't care about the liter of milk per se. No one's drinking liters of Irish milk around the world. Do you know what I mean? Our products aren't your bottle of Avonmore at all, which is what a lot of people who are not involved in the industry, what they're buying is fractates. They're buying fat and protein, yes, but huge fractates. Actually, the valuable element in terms of the bits of whey, for example, all the different elements within whey, which would mind boggle you alone. So everything that is coming out and literally nearly, James, thousands of different kind of micro products that are coming out of milk. Like we're so lucky to have this amazing product that we're one of the, I'm going to contradict myself, but we're able to produce because of an accident of geography and climate and culture in Ireland and 5,000 years of history behind us. Like I had a group of French farmers in last night into DII and Sodiel, and I was showing them a graph to say that your average person in Europe, Joe, the dairy industry maybe produces about 300 litres per person per capita. In Ireland, it's 1,800 litres per person per year, just to show you the importance of dairy per capita into the economy. It's off the scale. Like it also annoys me sometimes, James, when I see, oh, Ireland, I get this the whole time when I'm in Dublin, particularly dealing with maybe officials and people who are outside ag. If you go into the
Mm.
Department of Finance, Department of Enterprise, sure, agri is a sunset industry, and sure, look, you're a climate change and all this sort of stuff, and sure, if we got rid of these, sure, we could drive on with Google and Pfizer, and I can point to figures we did with EY, James, in terms of showing that agriculture, dairy alone, and I'm not even counting tillage and beef and sheep, dairy alone's value to the Irish economy is about 19 billion a year. Now, the last figure we did was 2023, which was 17.8 billion euros. Just to put in that in context, if you put every hotel, every bar, every restaurant in the country together as one single industry in terms of hospitality industry, that's 11 billion for that alone.
Farmers probably maybe feel that is that understood enough, Connor? Like
Not,
it's
not at
nearly
all.
taken as granted as such. It's there. The farmers at the minute are calving their cows, they're milking their cows. Probably don't get enough recognition. And I know there's lots of different elements of the industry, obviously that do they need to come together maybe and sell that message better? Or what's your thoughts
I,
on that?
I absolutely think so. And I think we're divils, James, for talking down our industry. We're devils
Mm.
to talk about it. Yes, there's price crisis. Yes, it's difficult at the moment. People are down. My father's, as we speak, probably pulling a calf down someplace in South Limerick as we speak. It's tough going. But like, hopefully we might talk to Generation Renewal later. But like, we have a fantastic industry. We are after with between strategy and hard work and luck, we've stumbled and planned our way into an industry. Particularly, I'm talking dairy here, particularly, and this is coming from a sucker farmer's son, where a good middle class lifestyle can be made from an average herd of cows. Do you know what I mean? You could rear a family. Yeah, it's not easy, but you can have a good life out of that. And we have achieved that. Very few other countries on this planet have achieved that. It's industrial farming. You go down to even what is supposed to be our peer dairy economy, and you know that this, James, from your own work, New Zealand. Jesus, you're at nothing unless you have 500 plus cows. You're at nothing, not to mind the costs and things like that. So like we're in a very lucky situation, but a precipice situation where we have here. And I just do think to your point, James, we have to be a lot more positive about dairy and agriculture in general in this. Otherwise we're going to talk ourselves into being a sunset industry, in my view.
Mm. Costs, and they were mentioned there. we do an awful lot of, and there's been a big focus, obviously, on costs of farm level. I'm seeing massive increases from 2021 into 2022. Maybe we thought they were going to be short lived, but Connor, at commercial farm level, they're there.
Mm.
They're kind of they're sticking. Um, there's lots of variation within that, and I don't doubt there's must be the same from a processing point of view. So I suppose what's the processing industry doing with regard measures taken, I suppose, to manage costs and maintain competitiveness in that
Yeah.
space?
So, firstly, I'll start with the bad news, James, and I alluded to it. It ain't going away. With the conflict in the Middle East, it will not help this. And we're seeing it run through with fuel and fertilizer already, and though they
Mm.
will have knock-on impacts. Okay, so we'll just take that as a given, and your listeners will know that. But I do think we have to be a lot more ruthless now in this new reality. And I'm talking to when I'm talking to my own shop mostly, firstly in terms of what we control in terms of processors on behalf of the farmers, but also the farmers themselves. We really, really need to tighten our own belts and look what we can do both inside the factory gate, inside the farm gate to reduce costs. Because every cent we spend is off the profit margin of both out of the farmer's pocket. So yeah, while we are growing, you have to spend to grow, speculate to accumulate, that has been there. We're now in a kind of era where we're probably going to try and hold our own, particularly in this post nitrates era. And we might touch on that later, but I think we've only stopped the clock for 3 years. We haven't had a victory. We've only kicked things out to 2028. But we have to use these 3 years, in my view, despite what is happening in the markets and geopolitics, I think to really, really assiduously look at costs. In our case, inside the processor gate, so that'd be looking at automation, looking at the application of artificial intelligence, looking at the application of digitization to see where we can ruthlessly root out costs where we can, and also, for us to be a competitive global mid supplier, because that's where we play. We do not play in our own small 5 million, 7 million island, 5 million in the Republic. That's not what's going to support, the 80,000 odd people across this island that are supported by dairy.
You mentioned it there, and I didn't come to it first because I didn't want to maybe spend too long and too
Mhm.
much of the podcast on it, but that whole sustainability piece, there's a lot of uncertainty there. You mentioned it with regard to derogation. There's a little bit more certainty there over the coming years, I suppose, for farmers, um, which is needed at commercial farm level and obviously at industry level as well. But maybe where is the industry at with regards that sustainability piece
Yeah.
in your own view?
This is going to be a forever war, I'm afraid, James. But I think there's always going to be challenges to sustainability, and there's also going to be a whack-a-mole element to it. So one minute you're on greenhouse gases and mitigation there and trying to roll out programs. The next thing, as we saw, water with the derogation and with nitrates came to the fore. 6 months time, it could be animal welfare, it could be biodiversity, it could be something, it could be food safety, it could be disease. Look at blue tongue now after coming to the island.
Mm.
So we're always, as an industry, going to be entertained for people like us who are kind of in the trade association side and farmers themselves trying to mitigate it. So look, we're never going to go to a stage where we can all relax and focus on producing milk. I'd love to say that, but the that's not the world we live in, James. But in terms of the sustainability per se, certainly I think there's now a new recognition, both politically and public, about farmers' efforts, particularly dairy farmers' efforts of really stepping up to the curve. The ERSI released a report yesterday showing that we were only 3% towards our heat pump targets and only 11% towards our retrofitting targets. By Jesus, if agriculture had that kind of figure, wouldn't you have every ENGO, environmental lobby group, and EPA jumping down on top of your head? I think we've made huge strides in a sector of the Irish economy which doesn't have the technological fixes transport and energy and industry where I represent have. We can electrify and things like a farmer can't electrify a cow. So we've made huge progress, I think, in GHG mitigation, in water quality, even biodiversity. We're trying to do these national programs, and I know it's not it's controversial at the moment, but Estas and Argent Green, despite recent controversy, I think has really, in my world where I kind of deal at European and international level, is the envy of many. Is it translating in cents for the litre, as we discussed? It's hard to say, but by Jesus, I wouldn't like to be in a world without that.
Mm.
I also see huge work farming for water. I know we're involved with his being a resounding success. We got 50 million of EU money that has now pretty much committed because farmers have responded. I think we're up to nearly 6,000 applications, and we're working with Teagasc and we're working with Law Pro. Farmers are stepping up, and what I find, I don't know what you're finding in Teagasc, James. Farmers see water better than they do GHG. They see biodiversity, they see animal welfare element. GHG
Mm.
was always very difficult because it was exoteric. It was hard to see, but farmers want their good clean water. Farmers want healthy, happy animals. Farmers want the bit of nature on their and like Ireland has competitive advantage there, and let's ram it home with the
And you make a good point there. It's about recognizing progress to date, isn't it? And
Mhm.
really doubling down on the, the technologies, the management practices, the programs that are there for farmers to help to really build on that success story so far. There's been a lot of conversation, Connor, over the last 12, 18 months around generational renewal. It's a major topic across the industry. How important is it for protecting Ireland's long-term milk supply? Um, and I suppose what role does the wider industry play in supporting that transition?
Yeah. And the first thing I make, and I'm lucky enough I'm a farmer's son, but you don't have a farmer, you don't have an industry. So we're on our knees every day as an industry saying, thank God for farmers. So if you don't have generation renewal, you don't have an industry. So we're absolutely symbiotic relationship, for want of a better word. Also, we have a heritage and a structure of co-ops, thank God, in Ireland. And now you have a situation which is very unusual across Europe, where 99% of the milk is now going through cooperative structures in terms of the primary side, which is very, very welcome. So you have a situation where we have gone through loads of problems that we have solved, a lot of them, but it is created, and I used this phrase previously in the podcast, policy uncertainty. So if you're a young fella or a young girl trying to come into the dairy industry and you see no long-term resolution to the nitrates directive, and you're expected to, put 50, 60,000 euro into a new slurry storage, or putting robots into the milk parlor to help your lifestyle, etc., or whatever, you're going to be very slow to do that unless government and the EU give you that policy certainty. Sorry to use a phraseology that is in our world here, but I think your listeners will get it. So when we talk to Europe and we talk to government here, this is what we say: give the guys certainty. Yes, there are difficulties, there are ups and downs in the markets, but dairy in particular has always delivered for families, communities, and farmers. It would also be remiss of me, James, to say that generation renewal does not just apply to the farming side of things. Whereas I often use the phrase, Dairygold and Kerry are the Google and Pfizer of rural Ireland, and I really believe that. But it is also hard with the demonization of dairy and the demonization of agriculture, unwarranted often now. But sometimes there's some home truths as well, we have to acknowledge, but there has been demonization. It's hard to get the non-dairy people, the engineers, the people in IT, the data scientists we know, to get to come to work in our industry. And sometimes they get affected by the negativity that sometimes some of our own industry, I engage in it myself, that we talk down our own industry and they go, Jesus, I won't take that job now with Ara Tip. I might go down the road to Clonmel Healthcare. Sure, farmers better. So we have to be careful about generation renewal, not just on farm, but also inside the factory gate. Because if we're going to do and be successful on that journey in terms of value added, we need the best of people in our co-ops, in our businesses as well.
I think that's a very, very good point, and positivity around the industry and the opportunities to forge a career within it, let that be at commercial farm level or also in terms of within the wider industry. Looking ahead, and we're going to finish here, Connor, because I've taken up a lot of your time, but there's a lot of good stuff there for listeners. But maybe, is there an issue or even an opportunity, maybe more importantly, within the dairy industry that you feel maybe isn't getting enough attention at the moment, but really should be part of the conversation? And I
Yeah.
suppose why?
I think I've maybe covered this too, but maybe I'll crystallize it in this last question. I don't think we have a dairy industry anymore. I think we have a nutrition industry. And I think we need to have that attitude as our industry. We are now a nutrition industry rather than a dairy industry. And that if we're going to be successful and able to compete internationally, which we are doing, I think we have to get into that mindset. And that leads into all the previous elements of the conversation we had. So, yes, be very proud of your dairy industry, but your dairy industry is the engine that drives now a international successful nutrition industry for our country, and our farmers and our industry have to get into that mindset to get ourselves up the value chain. That is not to disparage our very successful cheddar industry, our very successful milk powder industry, very successful whey industry, which are all fundamental building blocks of that. But my challenge to myself and to our industry and to our farmer suppliers and to our government is we have a huge opportunity here to become the main and most respected nutrition industry provider on the planet through grass-fed product. And it means we need a whole of sector, whole of farmer, whole of industry, whole of government, proper strategic approach to achieve that, and to wash away that rubbish we've been dealing with for the last number of years about climate demonizing and sunset industry and only a minor part of the economy. We have to absolutely turn the tables on that, because that would fix an awful lot of the other stuff. We have seen, like, if you pay your farmers enough, they will take the actions in terms of environment, etc., that will deliver. If you pay your workers enough and farmers enough, you will get rid of generation renewal issues both at farm and in the factory gate. And then if you respect your industry and your farmers enough, they would deliver for the Irish economy in a big way, and mitigate maybe our reliance on multinational actors. And I will say, for those of you who don't believe me, just cast your mind back to 2008, 10 years before you started your podcast, and when there was a bank collapse, the government weren't long coming back to dairy to get the Irish economy out of the hole, and we delivered in spades for that. And we have the Ireland we have today because of the dairy industry got itself up with oxters with others in agri, but that's now been forgotten about again. So we have to tell that story very, very strongly again, James, in my view.
I think that's a good place to leave it, Conor. And look, I appreciate your time. I think our listeners, and very much about being positive going forward in terms of where the industry is. There's always challenges, as you alluded to, but if there's one thing the dairy industry is good at, it's taking on those challenges and coming out with a positive story the other end. So look, that's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast. My thanks to Conor Mulvihill for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm James Dunne, and join us next time for your Dairy Edge.